citizen invocation.
Let's pray. Father, we come to you once again with thankful hearts of your blessings on us, help, rain and sunshine. And Father, we just pause now to thank you. Father, we ask you to just be with us as we conduct business of Paulding County. Father, we ask you to give us wisdom, give us guidance, give us direction, that what we do, will be pleasing to you. Father, we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Larry, you want to lead the pledge?
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Cecilia? All right, we just had the invocation and pledge. We wanted to make sure you're still there.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining the call, and thanks for the members to be here, the citizens, and John, thanks for doing the minutes and agendas and all that. Appreciate it. With that, we circulated the minutes from our last meeting. Everybody should have a copy of them. Any questions or comments, anything we may have missed or edits to the minutes? Other than that, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, minutes approved. We'd like to talk, I guess if anybody that went to the airport authority meeting, I guess it was last week, right? John, I guess you were there, and Mary, everybody was there. Yeah, except me, I apologize, I wasn't there. I'm gonna go to the next one. I'll open it up to you guys, folks that were there, and just kind of give us any thoughts you had, or anything that came out of that you want to share to the group and enter it in the minutes.
Well, a positive observation was that the military was there practicing jumps. So it is a very important asset that is available for our military to use. While we were there, there was also an air taxi that came in. So it is being used in Commerce. We were only there, I don't know, 2 hours total. So the airport is alive and well and up and running and doing its job.
That was my first airport authority meeting. So I don't have anything to compare it to, but I would like to hear the chairman of that committee speak to us. You know, we heard from Blake, and scheduling wise didn't work for him last time we scheduled it. I'd like to hear from him.
I sent an email to him yesterday that said, you know, we've had trouble meeting our schedule. Here's our dates. What date can you meet? So he did tell me at the airport authority he was. So we're trying to work that out.
Well, the other thing we decided to do was to share with him minutes of the meeting and kind of our agenda. Just seemed like it'd be good to open the communication there so that you can kind of see what's going on. So that was the other thing we decided to do.
Yeah, Mike and I were talking, and here we are holding a airport steering committee, and we're not even sending the agenda of the minutes back to the chairperson. So we're going to start including him on the distribution. That was a typo.
Mark, John, any other?
Yeah, you know, my observation was that, you know, they approved the bonds for the expansion and all that stuff is well cast in the stone and moving forward. So, you know, I think they had some pending litigation that they met on. executive session was about the only thing that we weren't privy to, but I think they went over financial review of the airport at that meeting for the last year, and I think the budget for this year. All that was discussed, so some of our action items were actually discussed in that meeting, and I think Blake was gonna send over some of those financial reports to us, so.
Yeah, I also sent him an email saying, you know, these are the action items that you got over on this meeting. One thing I noticed was they had, both the IDA and the airport authority had closed sessions, and they came out with no action taken. And that's, maybe it's just me not understanding, but if you don't have any action, why do you make closed session? That was just an observation. As a matter of fact, I thought it was rather funny at first, so.
Anything else?
I'd like to just say thanks to all y'all that came and took the time out of your day to do this. I appreciated it. Let you see a little bit about what's going on. And I will say on what John just said, whenever they go into closed session, or whenever the commissioners or anybody goes into closed session, when they come out and no action taken, it basically means there wasn't a vote. So if there's something that they're talking about, whether it's litigation or land acquisition or personnel or something, which is the three things that we can go in closed session, if we just discuss it, but we don't decide to, let somebody go as far as a firing or make a decision to settle on a lawsuit, then no action was taken. And if we decide on something with real estate, we bring that out at a later date. And then it comes back out to the public later. But if it's just discussed and there's no vote and nothing was done, then that's why they came back with that. So.
Well, the thing I want to suggest too, while we're still talking about the airport meeting, is whether or not you guys would think it'd be good to maybe meet out there one time. I don't think everybody's had a tour of the airport, just to, at some point, go out there and look around. I mean, we've seen papers, but it's still, it'd be interesting to kind of get a tour of what they're talking about and what some of these documents are we're talking about, to see it in person. What do you think of that?
I have no issue with that. I think that's actually a really good idea. In fact, probably maybe the next meeting we can do that if need be. I think you guys probably would benefit from going out there and seeing the work that's already been done at the airport, be it on the runway and or in the facility itself, to see what's going on and at what stage they're at.
I'll take action to schedule that with Blake, and I'll pass it out to everybody for you, and see what, maybe it would be a good idea to do it next meeting out there.
I've been out there, looked at the building, the main part, just kind of walked around, but I hadn't really looked at the whole thing, at least kind of get a feel for what's going on out there. We're still in the fact gathering phase, from what I can tell, so. Anything else there? The next item we had was review the finalized citizen input guideline form. Got the box marked over there. We sent an electronic copy to Blake to put his on the website. And then, for the citizens here, to the extent they can download it and circulate it around too. So I think we've done a pretty good effort to make it publicly available. So. Well, Larry's going to monitor the email. Mark's got the hard copy, and they're going to put together some type of tracking sheet so we can kind of summarize it or present it to the meeting, so we can look at how many are coming in and maybe a synopsis of what they're talking about, and then we can go through them. So. Any other comments or suggestions on citizen input? Let's just move forward. We got the deadline August 28th.
I was just going to say that at this point, the only email I received was from you just to test it out. But outside that, I haven't gotten anything else.
Okay. So yeah, so we have tested email at work. So.
Right.
Next item, discussion approval of the committee's recommendations for the airport authority membership. We've talked a lot about that. There seems to be consensus on number one, having the IBA and the Airport Authority have separate boards, separate people, and also, number two is have an advisory committee, which would provide greater depth to report to the official board, as well as, you know, opportunities to the extent people roll off. You got some people that could actually step up to the board. You know, the county's grown. We think there's probably a lot of aviation and other related folks that maybe we could get to serve on those boards. But you guys probably can comment on how difficult it is to get people on these boards, or how hard it is to find people. I don't know if you guys want to comment on that at all.
The three that are not members of the IBA are Kerry Tidmore, Jim Underwood, and Ellis Aston. And Kerry took my place. Jim's got excellent background in business. He's on boards for different automobile companies out in Texas. Ellis has been a businessman here in Paulding County. But I could name a half a dozen other well-qualified people in the county, aside from any of you, that are active in aviation right now. So, you know, Paulding County's grown a lot. We're not 30,000 people when I moved here in 1979, and when the vote was taken, there were 60,000 people. Now there's 156,000 people. The vote, I'm talking about the referendum on the airport in '97. So in the last 17 years, we've doubled again in size. So there are a lot of qualified people in the area now. That's my opinion.
Okay.
You can find people that sit on the board. We've got, there's plenty to choose from, I feel like. So we've got quite a few boards in the county besides that, so.
Yeah, I was just, you guys.
Why do you think that I mean, it seems to me that when we were at the meeting last week at the airport, you know, the same player sat down for the building authority meeting. So, you know, while there could be some joined at the hip stuff, it seems like the whole organization is pretty much joined at the hip.
Well, it is, and basically what happens is after the airport authority meeting from 9 to 10 or whenever it ends, 3 of them get up and leave, and the rest of them are there. And so that's part of the, so they are joined at the hip. And it doesn't, you can get into all kind of disagreements and difference of opinions about what's done or what's going on, but the bottom line is, probably to the citizens, the perception of, especially when it came time for the airport authority needed money and they borrowed that money from the IBA, how are you gonna say no? I mean, I don't, and I don't mean it wrong, but I mean, you got there's these 11 airport authority board members are asking the IBA, which is 8, and those 8 are on that board. So, yeah, it doesn't mean, you really don't even have to have 2 closed sessions. You go in and say, we want to borrow money, and, you know, let's ask the IBA, and I guess they held a mirror up and you ask the IBA. It doesn't, and I don't mean that light, but it's wrong. You just, that's not the position to be in.
Right, that wasn't something that they chose to do. That was actually dictated by the state when they passed the law in 1972. So, you know.
I completely understand what it was,
Yeah.
but the state made a big mistake. I mean, that's just bottom line. I don't care who dictated it. It's to put 2 boards on there and then to borrow money and to do business dealings between each other. There's got to have a separation, whether we believe we should have this or have that. There's got to be a separation of those boards.
Should have been changed a
Long time ago.
Mhm.
Bad business.
Well, I mean, and I think, you know, like back when we first even discussed this, I mean, I said I had to put myself back in 1972 when we really only had maybe 30,000 citizens here. So at the time when the state, you know, developed this law, you know, they felt that at that time, the only people really that were truly invested in the county were those who were part of the IBA and those who were elected officials. It's not to say that that's the way it is nowadays, so.
But I think we have consensus that there's gonna be a separate board, advisory board, and then the other thing that's talked about is just to do away with it and create a department within the county government, so.
So what does the, you know, if you're trying to trying to get aviation folks over here and building folks over here, I don't understand how the advisory board interfaces. You know, if you got aviation folks, you got aviation folks. You got business, building folks, you got building folks.
The way I looked at it.
The way it is now, I see that you need an advisory board because you don't have enough.
Right.
I believe Mike was thinking, I don't want to speak for Mike, but I believe he was talking about an advisory board for the airport authority.
In other words, if we decide that they're
Not for the IDA.
Yeah, in other words, there's 8 full-time board members for the airport authority. Perhaps you have another 8 on the advisory committee that don't meet as often. All they have to do is provide advice to the big board. I just had experience with this in another deal where you've got what's called both the big board, and then you've got a bunch of other folks that are in that same industry that just provide input to these folks to help make the decision and get more people involved, provide potential succession if these people roll off, and stuff like that. But, you know, once again, that's open for discussion with us. You can do that.
Well, what I did see in the airport authority meeting was that Blake Swafford had all the answers. Okay? So, going down your line of thinking, you know, maybe the inside the airport authority, some people ought to be tasked with a subcommittee on pavement thickness, or whatever that is, you know, and then come together and present it to the whole board. But it seemed to me that they did an awful lot of leaning on Blake,
One person,
you know.
Well, on that, not to be argumentative, Larry, but on that subject of back in the 70s, we didn't even use an airport authority board, really. Hadn't been used. But I don't think any legislation was ever brought up with anything in mind of somebody saying, well, we only have this many people out there. I just don't think that's what it was. They made it up the way they wanted to make it up. Now, doesn't matter to me, but bottom line is, I don't think it's right. But I don't think anybody said, well, we only got a population of 30,000. I can tell you today, with 150,000+ people, we got a whole lot more boards in the county now than we ever thought about having back in the 70s. When you talk about water sewer, your library board, your cemetery board, animal control hearing board, your fire tax advisory board. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And you could take the number of people and figure it up. That's not why they did that back then. They did it for whatever reason they wanted to do it. I don't know, but I think we all agree it needs to be.
Tom, do any of these other boards have an advisory board separate from the board that has whatever the function is? There is no precedent in the county, right, for
For an
having
advisory board? I don't
to
think we
another
really-
board.
Well, he mentioned the fire advisory board and.
And that is a board, advisory board.
Yeah.
Right, right, but there's not an advisory to the advisory board, right? There's only
Right,
one
that's
board.
right. The fire tax advisory board happened to be something that was brought up by Post One Commissioner Larry Ragsdale years ago. And those are a group of citizens that meet with the chief and the deputy chief, and they discuss what's going on, and they kind of work things out, and they bring it to the Board of Commissioners. But they don't have another advisory board with them.
Right. My thought would be if we had aviation professionals on the airport authority, they would become, in essence, the advisory group that's running the airport. I don't see a need to have a redundant board that's advising the group that's supposed to be running or advising the airport on how to function.
Out of all the boards that we have, I'm trying to be careful so I don't misspeak here. All the boards that we have right now report to somebody, whether it's the animal control hearing board, or it's the fire tax advisory board that meets with the fire chief and whatever, and if something needs to be done, they bring it to the Board of Commissioners. And you could go, the water sewer board, they're a board that advises, and they bring that information to somebody. These two boards, when it comes to the Airport Authority Board and the IBA, we're talking boards with power of spending money. power of making decisions. And that's probably the only two in the county that are like that, other than our tax assessors board or is coming up with the tax appeals and things when it comes to, hey, I think we should maybe do this or do that, but it's a board that's advising. But, so it's a different animal with these two.
But it's no different than, you know, for instance, with the Airport Authority Board, it's no different than many of the other airport authorities that are throughout the state. They are independent of the actual government.
That some of them are, yeah.
Well, you're really not independent, as I see it now. Any funding that goes through the airport
Has to come here.
has to come here, doesn't it?
That's only
I don't
by
think it
agreement,
has
that's
to.
only by intergovernment agreement, correct?
Yeah, it's not in the code of
Right.
ordinances.
Right.
So it's a, I guess you'd call it a handshake.
It's a voluntary policing that they have allowed.
Yeah.
But the airport authority has full privileges to go out and sell bonds without the county backing them if they choose to. I'm just sure it would make for a much higher interest rate if they were to do so,
Yeah.
because they don't have the financial wherewithal to guarantee them.
You know, on the.
Is it feasible for them to go out and get a bond?
It's
on their
legal,
own?
according to
It's
the
legal, but is it
majority.
feasible?
It'd be hard to
Well,
find somebody to buy them.
right.
Max.
The interest rate would be prohibitive. That's why they have the intergovernmental agreement to be backed by Paulding County, is my understanding.
You know, back on the advisory board idea, the board of commissioners set up this steering committee, which is kind of an advisory board. That could be an optional path that they could go down if the board of commissioners or if the airport authority decided, you know, we're gonna build a Ferris wheel in downtown Atlanta. You know, let's have an advisory board just to do a concept or feasibility, to look at it, just see.
It should be on an as-needed basis.
It could be an option, yeah.
Which I do believe Cecilia actually brought up in our first official meeting, had mentioned setting it up on a particular timeline, be it every 5 years, 10 years, so that they could go back and review what's currently happened during that particular time period and see if anything needed to be adjusted.
Well, who has oversight on the 5-year master plan that they're supposed to build for acquiring funds? Is there
Well,
any
the FAA
oversight on
has
that?
some oversight in that, because that's who's reviewing that 5-year plan, because they can't get grant money to apply towards projects unless they have it in their 1-year and 5-year plans.
Right. But I mean, who's the oversight? Is the county, just like they would any other building or anything, have oversight?
I don't believe so, and I think the difference is because, as we said, this is one of only 2 boards in the county that has the ability to raise their own funds. So when you get right down to it, who owns the airport? The answer is it's not Paulding County government, it's the airport authority. Their name is on the deed. So that gives them, in a sense, right of ownership that other departments and whatnot in the county do not have.
So if the county backs the bonds, can you see somewhere in the future that the airport authority, you know, issues $100 million worth of bonds in the next 20 years, that they have the leverage to stand on their own and don't need the county? You can see that coming.
Oh, yeah.
Well, one thing you gotta realize is, I forget the comment you made a minute ago. I should have wrote it down so I remember. You're talking about standing alone or being separate or.
I did.
Yeah, well, when your child leaves the house and you're no longer financially supporting them, then I guess they stand on their own.
Mine back home.
Careful, this is being recorded.
It's being recorded, mine aren't coming home.
That's what I said,
I want them to be successful and be gone, but bottom line is, those 2 departments, we can say whatever it is that they can do or whatever. Right now, they couldn't go get, the airport authority couldn't go borrow the money on their own bond. They don't have any real resources to be able to do it. They don't own the whole entire airport to begin with. And it was even said that right now they weren't in a position to go borrow a little bit of money from the bank. And that's been said. So the reason that it's easy for us as commissioners to borrow money is because on all those bonds, it says whatever we're borrowing, that if this project doesn't work, whatever that project is, we're promising to pay the money back. And if we break all of our promises, that we're gonna raise the millage rate up to whatever it is for that to pay that bond. It'll say you'll raise the millage rate up to raise it up 1.33 mils in order to make this payment. Our way of getting the money back to them and the bond company can sleep good at night knowing we're gonna do it. Taxpayers, all we gotta do is just do it. And they don't have the authority, airport authority don't have the authority to do that. They can't do that part of the bond. That's a different part on that bond. They don't have the authority to raise the taxes.
Right, but if they were to be, let's say theoretically, let's say 10 years down the road, they're financially stable and they're knowing about it and so on and so forth, they then would actually have the ability at that point to actually issue their own bonds and would not have to actually come to the board of commissioners for an IGA.
If they were financially stable.
Right.
And they were, in the bond, they may not get as, they may be able to do it, and I don't know that, we're not 10 years down the road. I know we are 10 years down the road from when this airport started, and they're not financially ready, and they can't do it. But 10 years from now, can they do it? They might be able to do it. They probably won't get as good of a credit rating, I wouldn't think, as the county does, because of what the assets we got, which is we can tax them. We have that.
But in a sense, that becomes self-regulating, because obviously if the interest rate is 100%, they can't afford to go invest in a property. If they want to come to you and get the backing, now that gives you some adult supervision over whatever the projects are. So to me, I see that as a good thing, that it's self-regulating in that sense.
Well, I'm kind of concerned that at some point in time, I mean, if we fast forward 42 years from now, okay, we're going back 42 years for 72, we fast forward 42 years, how cool is that? It could be the biggest economic engine within 5 counties at some point. And then it doesn't have oversight, it's just its own entity and with no control.
Wouldn't we,
So if we're gonna structure something, we need to structure something that's got some checks and balances.
Marco, when you say with no control, this is an organization that has the ultimate of oversight in that they can't go out and execute any project that affects the safety of the airport without FAA approval. So any project would have to first be presented to the FAA for safety, then you've got to present it for EPA issues and so forth. So I still see it as a self-regulating body. It's not that they can just go willy-nilly and do anything they want. It has to be with the idea of building a bigger, safer, more modern airport under FAA guidelines and approvals.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, that's if you're into airports, and, if you're a citizen of the county and you want the airport and all that, that's what's gonna happen. It's gonna have oversight from the FAA. But you may not be a citizen that wants all that going on. So you don't want to create a monster that you can't undo.
But that monster is already created.
Yeah, but but it's not, it doesn't have 8 arms and 8 legs right now, but it could. Let's say that air traffic goes through there and they generate millions of dollars, and somebody says, well, hey, keep this base, we need to put another runway in. And that's been done before.
Sure.
They don't need the board.
That's right. The way it's set up now, that is
They
absolutely.
don't need these guys. They got a cash cow.
Yeah.
They can start procuring that.
That's the way this particular airport and many others like it are governed. That's true.
So if we're gonna set up something, then we need some way
I will say
to
this.
have oversight, or maybe it never has oversight.
We went and looked at, what was it, the 9 commercial airports, and all but one are governed by the county themselves or the cities that they're in. There is a lot to it, and I'm with you. I think accountability is one of the biggest issues that we need to have as a recommendation for me. To be honest, Terry and I had talked earlier this week, and he kind of opened my eyes to something with the lease that we have right now. Actually, the airport authority is nothing but a landlord for the next 20 years with another 20-year option. With that said, I personally think that we ought to dissolve the airport authority and bring it back into the airport department, like a regular department, because all we've got is a lease. I mean, we're landlords. You're not gonna need bonds, you're not gonna need to buy land, but if you do, you can come back to the commissioners, I think. And when we was in the airport authority, one of my notes in the meeting, one of my notes is, they discussed the departmental budget. I mean, it was almost like it was one meeting already. They're operating so close together that, and even Blake made the comment, he said, I got 16 bosses. Well, if you dissolve the airport authority and have him as the head of the airport department, he's got one boss, and that's the guys behind us. And that's the majority rule. And then again, the accountability of the taxpayers' money, that's another one of my concerns. And you look at the past performance that we've had through the IVA and other authorities, it's just not there. So that would be my recommendation, is to not only separate them, but to make the airport authority function out of the airport department.
My concern with that is, personally as a pilot, I'd rather see aviation professionals manage the airport than elected officials.
Oh.
No offense, but.
Oh, yes, me too. But that's the reason you've got the airport department. These guys don't manage the road department.
Right, but their budget would be controlled by the Board of Commissioners, and vis-a-vis, then you could restructure whatever you wanted to out of the airport and hamper progress that needs to happen at the airport in a timely manner, where the airport's authority has that.
I wouldn't call it hampered, I would say control it.
It would be a restriction by any means.
I will say this, in my personal opinion, if it had been left up to an airport department rather than an airport authority, we wouldn't have an airport today. Because the airport authority had the flexibility to buy the land, to apply for the grants. They were very progressive in how many trips they made to Washington, D.C. to get funding. Elected officials would probably not have that same focus and that same energy, and it would have drugged the project out another generation. And we do have an airport today. I mean, some people don't, some people would prefer we not have an airport today, but.
I agree with you, but even though we've got one and they had this due diligence, we're losing $250 million a year on it.
And we lose a lot more than that on our road department, but.
Because of poor planning. I mean,
Well.
that's the reason I think they ought to have accountability, especially.
Okay, so
because-
you have to go back to the question of, is it a requirement that an airport make a profit?
No.
And my opinion is, it's not a requirement, because our road department doesn't make a profit, and we all agree that we need a good road system.
You know, one thing I did, I was reading through one of my airport management books this week, just for the board. I don't even think it rained this week. The key point that I think that, and I didn't think about this while I was reading this, an airport is a supporting function to a community.
Yeah.
It supports a requirement. If we've got industry that needs an airport, if we've got shipping requirements that need a train station, it's a support function. And it's not, we don't build the airport and then it creates industry. It's the other way around. Industry or the local economy or the society drives the airport. That's the reason Hartsfield expanded on my epic little screw up. But that's the reason they.
So
that's the reason they have
so
to
you
have
would
that
agree
runway
that it's
system.
not a requirement that it be a profit center
Oh, no.
for the county? Right.
It probably never will be.
Right.
I will say this, that there's 2 profitable airports, commercial airports in the state right now, and Hartsville is one of them. And as a matter of fact, I've talked to their people this week, and the different ones in there. The rest of them are living off grants, but there's other unquantitative benefits to having different things, airports and stuff. So.
I will say one thing, and I won't say too much on it, because I'd like to say more. That airport's out there, not because of this board, but because of the board that was here before. It was elected officials.
Almost called you Obama for that.
It was elected officials that.
George Bush did
That
that.
pushed that airport, and put the people in place to push that airport. It was elected officials.
So given where we are today, we essentially have two options. We take a bulldozer and we plow the whole thing up, or we continue to support it and go forward with an airport. Right? So given that I think any of the folks who are familiar with aviation would see that it is a very beneficial and good thing for the community, we would certainly not think that the daily action of going to Meigs Field and plowing it up would be the right thing to do. So I think we need to come up with what is a good approach going forward to have governance that would best suit the needs of the county and the airport.
I throw out one word of caution that was kind of stimulated by Mark's comment about 42 years from now. It's very hard for us to think 42 years out. We are in the metropolitan Atlanta area. But the current people that sit up here didn't develop that airport. I flew people to Washington to talk to legislators. That's about the only part I had in it, was flying people to get there.
Guilty by association.
But, we inherited the airport, really. Chairman Austin inherited the airport. He didn't put it there. And I'm a strong believer in the benefits of an airport, but I'm also a country boy. And I love the atmosphere and of Paulding County and the, that it's, I don't like to think of us as being in Atlanta. We're different. And I don't want that airport to ever explode into tons and tons of commercial flights. And all that just to say that if you think that it can do that in 10 years or in 20 years, and you cut the umbilical cord with the county. So I'm saying I would hope that at least 3 of 5 commissioners would always say, we don't want any more out here other than enough to sustain MROs. I think of an Asheville, North Carolina, which is an hour from Greenville, Spartanburg, like we're 45 minutes from Atlanta. And they've got 4 flights a day. Orlando and Branson, Missouri, and places like that. But I'll just go on record. I don't want Paulding County to be another Midway next to Chicago. Airports going in and out of there every 3 or 4 minutes.
I like this guy.
Yeah, more than you thought you did.
I don't like Midway either.
But you understand my point. If you take it, if it becomes separate, and it could produce 20, 30 flights a day. I don't want that. I don't know who else up here. I know Todd doesn't want that.
My personal feelings is because as small as we are, as much trouble as we're in right now, we need to have the accountability back up here, and we need to get our feet back on the ground and do something. Whether it be commercialization or whatever it is, but I think because the taxpayers are liable, I think they need the accountability.
Well, I'd like to preface this. Any bond that's happened out at the airport so far has actually been backed by the FAA. Is that a correct statement?
Been backed by the FAA?
Has been backed by the FAA.
We may have had FAA pay back, reimburse money to us.
That's correct. That's what I
But it
said.
hasn't been.
So 90% of it is guaranteed to be paid back, not necessarily within 12 months.
No.
Terry, should I tell him my button on this one? Go ahead.
My point is, the FAA has been in the process of reimbursing up to 90% for all projects that have happened out at the airport, be it the buying of it. Excuse me. It hasn't necessarily paid them off completely at the 90% rate, but it is in the process of doing it. Is that not a correct statement?
No, you don't have, well, you take if you're talking about everything out there, you've got a $1.2 million water tower.
But was that by the airport, or was that done by the IBA?
It's done by the IBA, so I'll
So
follow
I'm
up.
talking about airport authority.
Well,
Let's not talk about IBA, because that's a totally different.
Yeah, it is, and I'll tell you this on that.
Same principle, though.
Well, you tell me, we're not.
Yeah, everything that's been done has been under the FAA, and they've reimbursed us in the 3.6 million that's, just gone through the appeals court. Take 90% of 3.6 million, and that's what we'll get back.
I may not have all my figures right, but you've got 1.1 water tower, which is IBA, and I know you said don't mention that. You got a 1.2, which is really gonna be pushing 2 million, at least a 1.7, 1.8 hangar that's out there. You got the other hangar that really doesn't even belong to us, period, cut and dry. You got the building, the airport building itself, which was, and I may have some numbers wrong, so I'll go ahead and apologize, but roughly 3 million from the state, with us matching about $750,000. And that was from the state, but it wasn't FAA, and we matched $750,000. You've got the infrastructure, you've got the roadway coming up to the airport. I mean, there's the original roughly $50 million was, all you had out there was land and a runway.
Right.
And that was,
Right, but the IBA is a totally different situation, and I believe that should fall under their discussions as to should they continue to perform anything out at the airport, or should it fall under the purview of the airport's authority. And that's their decision, and that's their topic.
and one of the things you could say with that, because y'all were talking about what was profitable, or what would be profitable in the future, and the money made, and it could be a cash cow, whatever. It could be a cash cow. I don't know who it would be for, because the IBA has the authority to do all kind of tax abatements out there on things that they do. Whatever it is they're doing, they have that authority to work that out. And if they work all that out, it could be a cash cow, but it's not gonna be a cash cow for the citizens.
But
I
I
think
think
that,
a lot of,
here, let me explain how the cash cow that I see it in the way I perceive the quote-unquote cash cow. It's not necessarily through the airport itself necessarily that the airport is creating the cash flow, but it's the businesses that come out, and the amount of jobs that they create, and the amount of business that they're bringing in. It's not necessarily that the county's creating the money, it's those businesses that are being drawn in. So if we go back to the original intent of the lease agreements that were signed back in 2012, which was the initial one was to lease out 60 acres of airport property for the use of MRO and manufacturing. And then the second lease was to lease the terminal building itself for the use of commercial air service. It's a business venture that the Airports Authority is going into with Propeller Airports in an effort to actually create revenue that would then be reinvested back into the county, not necessarily back into the airport. So I don't believe that any of the money that the airport creates goes back directly to the airport itself. A portion of it would go to the airport department, which would then set its budget as it is, but the rest of it would go to every other department, fire, sheriff, water, so on and so forth. And then another portion of it, which is 3% of the county taxes, 1% is actually dedicated strictly to the school system. So once again, you're funneling money directly into the schools. So it's not a cash cow for the airport, it's a cash cow for the county itself.
Well, if your IBA, which is not our job here, has the authority for tax abatements, and they put them out there for 10 years, if Propeller Investments has these leases, it's already set in stone what we're gonna get from them as far as from their profits. It's already set in stone, you're not gonna get no more of that. And there's tax abatements and Propeller doing this.
But the contract they signed was not through the IBA, it was through the airports.
I understand, but there's still, the IBA's gonna be doing projects out there, and they're gonna be working with the IBA and economic development to bring those people in there.
So,
and do that.
and maybe that's a discussion that we need to have as a steering committee is what projects would be acceptable to be had out at the airport? For instance, I don't know why the water tank was put out there, but what I do know is the hangar that's being constructed right now, that is actually an IBA hangar that's being constructed, or IBA funds that are being used. But that's because they're trying to bring an MRO to the county. So that, once again, is actually an IBA function. But maybe we need to speak as a board and say, here are the restrictions as to what the IBA and the Airports Authority can realistically enter into as far as intergovernmental agreements as to what can happen out there.
And trying to bring us back to what we were talking about is looking at airport authority membership and government. And it's good that we kind of go off all these different discussions, because it kind of brings us back to what we're trying to focus on is if we go back to the beginning, it was the act that created the authority, the scope, how it interacts with the IBA. And, I think everybody seems to agree there's consensus that need to be separated. And they're gonna have different missions. The IBA appears, they're trying to bring in economic development. The airport is helping them and complementing them with that. But to wrap up this topic so we have time for other ones, it sounds like, we just gotta, have either continued discussions or the pros and cons of either keeping the authority, making adjustments to it, making sure that it's separate, or there's been some discussions about just having an airport department. There's pros and cons to both. The airport authority, if you have that, obviously you can get a little more quasi-government. Things get done quicker because there's a board that's out there that's got its own mission. It has, it's been appointed by the county officials, but there's not such a direct line back to the voters, you might say. But with that, I wanted to move on to the next agenda item. I think we just need to, as we talk about what our goals and deliverables are, that's when we've got to really hit the pen to the paper and start making recommendations.
I think on that, closing that one out, I think we all agree that the IBA and the airport authority or the airport department has got to be separate entities. From there, I think we need to have some.
So everybody's on the same page then, right?
Do we need a vote on that, or just a consensus?
I would say it's a consensus, because I don't think we've gotten into the nuts and bolts as to who should really serve.
So the consensus is that those two boards should be separated, their membership should be independent.
Exactly.
No one disagrees with that.
So that's one.
So we got our first consensus, okay.
We may not get another one.
You might want to record what that means.
We're all good.
Put a little star by it.
So we've got the concept, we just work
Right.
out the details.
We need a subcommittee.
Yeah.
Advisory board.
You might get the water anymore.
I would recommend that we work in the group back and forth with emails and stuff, because when Terry and I talked this week, that was real enlightening, especially when you look at how we're at with the airport. It's almost like a landlord instead of an airport management group. So that just totally floored me.
But at this point, it would be a landlord with the agreements that they've signed with Propeller Investments.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that any other contract that they sign in the future lends them to being an actual landlord. They would actually have more involvement in the airport. So we're talking
whole management over to them. We don't have.
Well,
no, we didn't.
what we did is we turned the management of the terminal building.
And general
over to them.
aviation and commercial.
Well, not exclusively.
Word for word of it.
Well, they have rights to go do that from the terminal building, but it doesn't say that the airport authority couldn't do other things. I mean, they can still enter into other agreements with other companies, but the management of the terminal building has been leased out for the next 40 years.
Right, and so, for
What
instance,
else would you do out there besides commercial and general aviation?
well, you've got the MRO companies, so you would have to authorize those MRO companies that are coming in, and you would have to manage those MRO companies. In addition to the hangar that's out there right now is being built, but they don't actually have a tenant for it. So once again, they would actually oversee the tenant, but in addition to, they would actually enforce those policies for that particular MRO. It's not necessarily that they're the lease, they're not the management company of them, they're actually running the airport itself as well. So
It's not all that different.
Well, the FBO is actually handled by a separate company, so they've already leased that out to Paulding Jet Center, so there are
We only
multiple.
have one FBO, we have one.
You could probably-
Bigger airports have multiple
Right.
FBOs, so that's not unusual.
Sure.
But you've also got, that's a 40-year lease. I don't care how you look at it, it's a 40-year lease. It's also 60 acres.
As a separate lease, that's right.
But he has that option to take those 60 acres.
Right, but those 60 acres are only to be used for MRO manufacturing only, which has actually been stipulated in the lease agreement, so.
And that's jobs, that's high-paying jobs, that's, gonna pay property tax. Hopefully they'll live in Paulding County, they're gonna shop. You know, I'd like to have a tax revenue expert come and talk with us, because I don't think we really are grounded in whether something's profitable for the county or not. If an airport authority loses $100,000, but $1 million goes back in the local economy, has the county lost?
How many times that roll continue?
Well, there's probably consensus too, and I'll throw out that there needs to be some type, maybe it's out there, we just don't have it yet, some type of business plan that's based on some type of projections and the bringing of these companies in, and, you know, there's gonna be high-paying jobs and all that, if there's some.
There again, the airports supports the industry don't support the airport. Everybody-
Seems like if the airport is driving,
Well,
We did not do that. Or,
It seemed like a lot of us somewhat agree on a few things, but Dave said something a few minutes ago about having control and what you didn't want to see in 42 years. And you kind of mentioned that. You don't have control of that airport with a 40-year lease if you get 139 from the FAA.
But you do have control over those, the land.
We won't have control.
Well, it is landlocked, is it
We still won't have, I'm just saying, I'm not gonna argue
not?
about it.
My point is, there are
100%.
constraints that hold it to where it
But we
is.
have-
but I'd like to see us not go down that path of discussion, because there is a signed agreement
Exactly.
that says we will deliver, we being the airport authority, will deliver a Part 139 certificate. That's already inked into contract language, that
Right.
if we undo, we would be recommending litigation for breach of contract. So I see that as beyond scope of this group,
Yeah,
because
we're
that's a
looking forward.
decision that was made in the
Yeah.
past.
We're looking
And by the way, with my concept of going to the airport board, you would take that lease and move it underneath there. They would
But you
honor
can't
it.
throw it away.
You can't
The
throw it
lease-
away.
The lease
Without
already
paying.
exists.
Right, but right now, those leases aren't even signed with the county, it's signed with the airport authority, which
Correct.
then again, you would have to assume that that the county itself would assume those leases, and it's
Yeah.
not and there's nothing explicit saying that. So once you dissolve the airport's authority and assume that the board is actually going to assume
That's
those
something
leases.
that they would have
Yeah,
to
now
work with.
that-
That's something you
Once
have
you
to
put
work
it-
out
now
before
you-
you did it. I mean, that's just part of you
Right,
need to do the transition.
But if you're already, if certain people are already upset with the lease agreements that are already set at this point in time to then even venture down that road of what if, you can really throw the county into a further litigation
Legal-
issue.
legal battle.
Right.
so let's go back to kind of the big picture here. You know, I'm moving on to the discussion of finalization committee's charter, goals, and objectives, which kind of help keep you focused. A lot of these were the verbatim out of the report you had sent, as far as, you know, we talked about, number one, review the mission and purpose created by the General Assembly in '72, how it ties in with the mission and purpose of the IBA and the airport authority, what changes are required. Talking about the mission and purpose of the airport authority, review the airport authority respective roles and responsibilities, are they being fulfilled? If not, what changes could we recommend that would produce positive results? Should the current annual level of funding been increased, decreased, what amount, based on comprehensive matrix? Current funding is acceptable, what expenditure reporting and business plan should support annual spending? I'm not sure I want to get in the weeds of that. I'm just more of give us a business plan that we can look at so that we can help advise on any changes to legislation.
Right, this is Cecilia. May I add something if you don't mind?
Sure.
How would you feel about, and we can discuss this in emails, how would you feel about this committee member being assigned to contact an airport authority of a comparable type airport, like for instance, Concord Regional, and now having 2 to 3 commercial flights a day within the weekend? Would they be able to offer even any insight, maybe assign the traffic to one airport and just their ideas and
Well, we had, John and Terry kind of worked on a matrix looking at surrounding airports around Georgia, really, just to kind of see how they were set up and some basic information.
How they were governed, just basic general information, how many planes they had at their base there.
But I think, you know, when Blake was here, he actually talked about a couple airports that sound like they were trying to model after, which maybe that's the goal of what they're looking to achieve, but, I think there's consensus that we need to see more of a detailed business plan on does the airport authority have a mission statement? Do they have a strategic plan, a business plan? And maybe that's a recommendation that the new board needs to do right away, given what the cards they've been dealt, the contracts they've been entered into, you know, are somewhat set in stone as how they execute that going forward.
You know, and I wonder if we can get that information from Calvin Thompson when he actually shows up.
Well, Blake was stating that it was not a business plan. It wasn't, the airport wasn't governed under a business plan. It was a couple other documents, but.
What's the 5-year and the 1-year plan?
That they sent to the FAA.
And he's got the 5-year improvement plan, it's actually on their website, so. The next item was recommend changes to board composition such as members, boards and appointments, term of service qualifications. We kind of talked a lot about that. Pretty much have got some consensus there. Recommend changes to the management areas of responsibility, level of authority, staffing levels, compensation, range of duties, market flexibility. Recommend changes to the short and long-term business plan. Maybe that's an agenda item for next week, that we go over that 5-year improvement plan and see what it looks like. I'm not sure if everybody's looked at it yet or studied it. Anybody?
And maybe it's one of those things where we may need to request Blake to come back and be involved in that discussion, because he is very familiar with what all's been presented to the FAA, and has an understanding of what was there, instead of us speaking in hypotheticals, or maybe simply.
Well, at least we need to review it and see what we understand it appears to mean, and then to the extent we can ask him questions ahead of time.
I would even say, you know, we've got 2 weeks to sit down. I mean, we can all do it on our own, and
Yep.
then when he shows up in 2 weeks, we can have our questions with us.
Okay. And then there was the other, you know, from getting citizen input, the other one that was circulated, the one that Todd delivered to the committee, where there was a lot of really specific recommendations from a citizens group regarding the composition of the board and other ideas. So, the reason I say all this is that eventually we got to put together a presentation to the Board of Commissioners, so we need to start building the bones of that, start putting some meat on it. So, my idea is to help, that'll help hopefully keep us focused.
Your objective should be 1 to 2 sentences too, by the way. So we're gonna have to use a lot of raw words to make them fit into one of those
Right.
sentences. They don't have to be, but generally your objectives are 1 to 2 sentences.
So, like I said, I've circulated this, just 3 pages, as far as kind of giving some broad, overarching concepts of what we're supposed to do, so. And that'd be a roadmap for getting our work done. So.
Is there anything that we should be adding to what he's passed out? Has everybody read them?
I need to review it more closely. I've read it, but I hadn't studied it.
The one thing that I saw is even though it'd be out of scope, we ought to make general topics, I think, that stuff that we discover that the IBA ought to wear green shirts to meetings or, you know, if we see it, not go into detail about it, but just topics that we discover that might be helpful for somebody else. And there, we used to call them, parking lot items. You just stick them up and it's just something that's out of scope, we're not gonna address it, you just stick it up on the wall and say, oh, by the way, here's other issues that need further research. So that keeps us employed in the steering committee business.
Did we ever truly get a commitment of Calvin Thompson for
Yes.
next week? Or
No,
for our
not-
next meeting?
No, not for next meeting, he said he would work with us. He said he would work with us. And that's when I sent him that email, said if you can't meet ours, here's ours, when can we get with you? Even, by the way, I suggested that we not even have an offline meeting or an unscheduled meeting with him, so sorry to meet you guys.
Well, a special meeting.
A special
Call that a
meeting,
special
special
call
call
meeting
meeting.
for that topic, yeah.
You know, I still go back to it, maybe best for us to meet at the next meeting, out at the airport,
Airport.
and actually kind of have an over idea of what really is going on, and then incorporate that into our discussion with Blake.
Our next meeting on 14th at the airport.
That is correct.
Okay. Because I'd like to finalize this charter, and I think I want to open up, we should have some citizen inputs. And I think, I'm in favor of setting aside some time for folks that have expressed an interest to speak, to talk to the folks that have been coming to each one of these meetings and listen to what we have to say, and so that we give them an opportunity to get their input as well. We'll work out the details of that, but we'll see how much written input we get. But so we're gonna have our next meeting out at the airport. Everybody's gonna read this charter. You know, we can exchange emails and edits, comments, but the goal of the next meeting would be have something in substantial final form that we can sign off with, that this is kind of our roadmap going forward, so that we can narrow, you know, have a pretty good scope of what our scope is.
And we need to review that five-year plan, it's on the website.
Yeah, put that on there too.
I have a question for our commissioner. I feel a question on economic development. The county has its own economic development personnel, they have their own,
Two people
right?
and a board.
So if I'm a MRO and I'm going to become, do I go see the people at the airport, or do I get a hold of economic development? How should that flow? In your guys' opinion, how should that flow in the structure of government?
I think it should go through economic development. You know, whether it's out in the new park, industrial park, or there's a couple of industrial parks. Somebody that wants to locate there, they want to locate at the airport, it's still development in the county. And I think, obviously, they'll be put in touch with Blake or Jamie Gilbert to go out to the airport with the interested party and see what's out there. You'll have to get a brief from Blake about what's available and
So
answer questions.
economic development, they answer to the board of commissioners? Does that, I guess, department do?
Funding.
Well, actually, right now, they're funded from, from the county, they're funded from the city of Dallas, funded from, as of right now, they're still funded from Hiram, may not be this coming up next year, and some from the chamber, okay, in different forms. That board was actually set up, when somebody, I've always felt like we did a bad job in the county for forever. Somebody coming in needed to know anything about whether it's permits or business licenses or just trying to start a small business or trying to bring something big here. They didn't have anybody to go to, and they went to the city of Hiram, city of Dallas, the chamber. It was just a hodgepodge. And so the idea behind that was to set up a, not really a one-stop shop, but this is where you go. And this economic development department can get you the answers that you need to do to get, or get you in the right direction. That's really what it was. And they've worked with IBA, the airport, or whatever. Naturally, there's still nothing out there right now as far as the airport's concerned, but Jamie's worked hard on bringing things in. But that's the way it's kind of set up right now, and they really stand on their own. Jamie really doesn't report to us. It's really, the idea was a little bit from Hiram, a little bit from Dallas, more from the county, the Chamber of Commerce, and then he's out there making it happen.
He's actively recruiting, going
Yes.
to different cities.
He's not waiting on them.
No, I'm just saying, but the structure, as you see it, should be that if anybody wants to move into the county, then the first person you need to hook them up with is economic development. And then that splinters off on what direction they should go. They should, you know, you need a building, we'll put you in touch with the building guys. Or if you need a taxiway.
Right.
And you're familiar that the state has an economic development department, a
Right.
commissioner. So Jamie's in close contact with them, depending on, if they know what we've got to offer in Paulding County. You know, other statistics on Paulding County, you know, the things that hurt us. We got a lot of, how many Title I schools? We have 15?
9 out of 19.
9 out of 19 Title I schools. Meaning the level of income is low in Paulding County. So a company may look at that, or look at education, or required airport, may not care about an airport. But anyway, there's that connection between the state's economic development and Jamie lets them know what we've got, and vice versa.
The entity that came out to the airport and made a deal, did they go through economic development or they go straight to the board, or do you know?
I thought they went through the state, the first
Okay.
contact. Don't quote me on that.
State economic development.
Yeah.
Kind of going, here's three candidates,
Are you talking about Propeller
I guess.
Investments? I mean, you talking about the lease that's there now?
Yeah, I mean,
that was-
how did they get funneled into that? Did they go economic development and that spears out, or
It
did
was,
the board just step up and say, hey, I got a place for you?
it
or
was
how-
it was Blake and Brett Smith.
I think it was a conference, there's an annual conference, NBAA, Terry's probably been to it, where everybody in aviation around the world is there. And Propeller's got a board made up of, people that are known throughout the world in aviation.
I just wanted to see how economic development tied into the building authority and the airport authority.
You can have Jamie come talk for 10 or 15 minutes.
I've been to some of his annual meetings and all that. I mean, he's the guy that's out there promoting Paulding County, and then he helps facilitate. You need to talk to them. And he gets measured every year how many jobs and companies he brought in, so it's pretty clear what his mission is. And from what I can tell, he's doing a good job of that.
I mean, he goes as far as Europe. I mean, he went there just a couple months ago, if I remember correctly, to go to a conference over there as well. And I believe that's how you got him hooked up with Interval, to be honest with you.
Interroll was actually here. He facilitated the new facility.
Okay.
And he worked that out, and they got some tax abatements and different things from the new, they're gonna have some other employees, but Interroll was actually here with a company that started out of Powder Springs, and then moved here into Hiram, and then Interroll basically bought that company. And, so it was a relationship with that business owner and Interroll that had done business for years, is actually how it happened.
I'm sure he'd be glad to talk with the committee here. He would enjoy it. So he could talk to you for several hours if you go to his office.
Guess we want a time limit on that.
He's got all kinds of maps and diagrams, master plans.
So
I've
we
sat
got,
through one of those meetings, it's actually pretty enlightening, to be honest with you.
Well, you said it didn't sound like it.
No,
I sat
actually,
through one of those.
it's actually pretty enlightening. If you sit down, he's a wealth of information, but he does actually have a plan as to where he's focusing his efforts and where he wants the county to go. So it's-
Quick question for the committee, is that in scope of what we're supposed to be looking at?
Personal opinion, no.
yeah, I think that's, I mean, I just don't know that, he's a great guy, and it'll be great that this is what's going on, but I'm not sure how much it's gonna help us.
Maybe the interface between what he does and the airport might be. I had to think about that after I said that.
I think we ought to look at the 5-year plan and then go from there.
Go from there.
You know, he might have some insight after he digests the 5-year plan.
Just keep in mind, Mark, though, that 5-year plan is airport-centric. It's a plan that's written to, addressed to the FAA, to say, here are the improvements that we want to make in the airport. The FAA makes no judgment about whether that's a good business move or not.
Yeah.
They're just saying, if you're going to expand the airport, it's got to be within these guidelines. Here are the projects that you would need to fund. And if you come forward and request these, the FAA will help you with 90% matching grants and that sort of thing. But there's not going to be, if we're looking for a tie between that 5-year plan and anything that we would recognize as a business plan, I don't believe that tie exists.
Yeah, I don't think they've listed out like what companies they're
Right,
expecting to move in.
Right. We'll generate 50 new
Yeah.
jobs if we expand the runway by 32 feet. It's not that kind of plan.
Right. It's just a general layout and design
Well,
concept for
it's
that.
very specific in the areas that, for example, how do we get to a 139 certificate? Those guidelines are very specific. You gotta make the runway this wide, you gotta have this much slope, this much overrun, PAPI lights, ILS, all of those things. But that doesn't translate into jobs and tax base and what have you.
But that is a specific plan that where you've got specific goals that you've got to meet.
For a different purpose, to be used for a different purpose besides business.
Blake actually.
That's what
told
we've
me-
already agreed to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we use that as our template, and then you say, okay, what is our, the authority's 5-year plan that overlays over top of that, because it's gonna take 5 years to accomplish this or whatever, so what are you gonna be doing for those 5 years? Your plan has to mesh into this, so that's what we need to see, is what is their plan?
Their 5-year plan is a lot bigger than just the Part 139.
Well, I'm hoping, I haven't seen, they said they had no business plan, so
But
I'm not sure what their plan is.
outside of the specific requirements to get the 139,
That's
Ms. Blake told me it was a conceptual plan. That this is our plan.
Probably true.
So,
It's not that necessarily that plan will actually take effect in 5 years or that in its entirety. It's a projection of what they believe will happen in the next 5 years. They have to present it to the FAA. Am I correct?
Yeah, and
The
it's a
FAA.
rolling target. You
Right.
update your 5-year plan, I believe, every year.
every year.
And so you're saying, where do we think we need to be as an airport relative to the FAA in 5 years? And you keep rolling that along with a much more detailed 1-year plan for what are the specific projects
that you're
for
doing.
which we're going after grant funding for this year. Yeah.
Because you've got to look at the next year budget.
So
Lucky we had a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, and like you said, they were moving targets. When you hit the 5-year plan, though, you were actually looking at capital investments and expenditures, and you were putting prices on them and doing the cost trade-offs on them.
And I believe that kind of plan is actually their 1-year plan. That's where they're bringing in.
Each year you would fine tune that depending on what the industry was doing
Absolutely,
and what,
yeah.
and how it worked, and what you planned, the equipment you planned to buy 5 years ago generally was not the same, but you started putting dollar figures to it and cost trade-offs.
So, Terry, it sounds like, lawyers get accused of not talking in plain English, I can see how aviation folks. If the end game is the Part, or the
Part
139,
139.
so translate that, what does that get you out at that airport?
Okay, what they are specifically going for is a Part 139 Class 3 certificate. A Part 139 Class 3 certificate says that this airport is certified by the FAA for these types of operations. And it includes things like fire suppression, just a whole host of topics that the FAA says if you are going to have 9 to 30 passenger scheduled service, then you have to meet these requirements. It does not require you to have any commercial traffic. It does not require you to be pursuing a particular air carrier. It just says that your airport is certified for these types of operations. And the FAA makes no judgment about the financial feasibility or the business feasibility of that. They're simply saying if you meet these requirements, then you get a certificate that says you are Part 139 Class 3 certified. Now, the reason Propeller wants that is because they're interested in bringing 9 to 30 scheduled passenger service. I believe it's called Part 121, isn't that right? Part 129, scheduled service to the airport, and you can only bring Part 129 scheduled service to an airport that has been properly certified by the FAA for those operations. That's how they mesh together.
It's just like an airplane has to meet certain requirements to meet the FAA requirements. It's got to be landing.
Whether it takes off or
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
it's got to meet those requirements.
You've got a minimum that you have to
You
meet.
said 9 to 30, is that?
If anything under 9 passengers does not require a Class 3 certificate, anything over 30 will require a higher class or lower. I
So
forget
this
if it
is-
goes lower or higher, but a different
So
class.
planes that carry between 9 and 30 people, if
On
they
a
get,
scheduled basis,
could land at that airport?
could land at
if-
that airport. If we had a Part 139
Okay.
certificate, and that includes TSA requirements, so you've got to have passenger screening. It includes fire protection, so we have to have a fire truck,
Crash
which
truck.
they already have, a crash plane. It includes fuel abatement, if your fuel tank overflows, how are you going to contain that fuel, keep it out of the creeks? It requires all of those types of procedures and plans to be in place. And once you demonstrate to the FAA that you meet those minimum requirements, then they will issue you a certificate that essentially says you are certified for those operations. That's all it says.
Because you can get it, and if you can't get anybody to fly in there, then it doesn't matter, right?
And you can keep it forever. If we get that certification and Propeller goes out of business, as long as we continue to meet those requirements, we'll be 139 Class 3 certified until it's either revoked or rescinded. We can either voluntarily give the certificate up, or the FAA can come in and say you no longer meet the requirements. But until one of those two things happens, we're still certified forever, okay? And another air carrier could come in and say, okay, I want to bring 9 to 30 passenger service into your terminal, and we would already have the requirement to do so. We wouldn't have to go repeat that exercise.
What is it estimated to cost to get a 139, just to meet all those requirements? I mean,
Well, this is where John and I disagree a little, because I say it's free and he says it's all tax money, but,
First of all, it depends on where you're at
and how much you've already
and how
done.
much you've already done.
Yeah. So we already have an ILS. We already have a PAPI light system. We already have a certain length of runway that's required. We have just expanded the taxiway width to meet the requirements. So there are certain apron issues, overrun issues. There's all these very technical building construction it's almost like building your house to code. So what we've got to do is we've got to go back and reverse engineer this airport to the code of a 139 Class 3 requirement.
So I guess what I'm saying is, even though they may not have a per se business plan, we can review these documents and come up with, I guess, what they're shooting for, because they're trying to get a Part 139.
Well,
there's various
that's in
leases.
black and white.
Yeah,
Well,
that's a given, they have to do
Yeah.
that.
Part of a business plan.
That's in the lease, they have to do that.
Right.
They have to do it.
Right.
So that's their business plan, they have to do
No.
it.
Yeah.
My question is, what are they gonna do after they got it? What are they gonna do with it? What are they gonna be preparing to do? What is
That's
that,
where the business.
that business plan, that,
But again, that's up, as it stands right now, that's up to the Paulding County Terminal Partnership,
Yeah.
because all Paulding County Airport Authority has agreed to do is deliver that certificate. The business plan
And supply the facilities.
and supply the lease of the terminal. But the business plan is really upon Silver Comet Terminal Partners for them to come up with their business plan on what are they going to do with it now. Because the airport authority is out.
Well,
You know,
that's
they
why,
provided the terminal and the certificate, and now they sit back and let Silver Comet Terminal Partners decide what kind of air carriers they're gonna go negotiate with, for
And that's
example.
why Blake said that was all in private session, because that's basically proprietary information of why they're entering this.
It's in
why
private
they-
session by Silver Comet Partners, not private session by PCAA, because they do not go
Right, right.
You
negotiate.
don't have any,
They have no
Input.
part in
Right.
negotiating with air carriers at this point. That's all on Silver Comet now.
Mhm.
Yeah,
That's how I interpret it.
okay.
I did a real quick, Common Core math exercise today. Come up Common Core.
Did you come up with pi is equal to 3?
Yes.
Okay, good.
At least it's defined now. If you look at that $3.6 million strictly at the face value of the thing, and they say Propeller brings in $250,000 a month, it's gonna take us 50 years to pay that bond back.
No.
No,
Once
that's
again,
all paid
Well,
for by
I'm
the
just
FAA.
saying that the face value of the bond, if you, with the 2.5% that we're getting, it would
But
take
that's
50
not,
years.
that's not what's intended to pay the bonds back. What's gonna pay the bonds back is the grant that
My
the
tax
airport.
money from my flights and my fuel.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
So we agree on.
Yes, we do agree on that, but it's a
But
tax
that's only
base
if-
from the flying public
Right.
to benefit the flying
The-
public.
yeah, that's fine, but I agree
In
with you.
addition to
I'm
the
just-
remaining 10% would be
I
paid
just,
for
I just
by
said that that was
Propeller
just a
itself.
general
Yes.
statement, I'm not saying that we're gonna have to pay that. But if you look at the 2.5% that we're gonna get off the lease, if I'm saying anything, I'm saying the lease was kind of questionable in my opinion. But it will take really, 50 years, and if they make $250,000 a month. Or
But again,
2.5%.
you're
I
looking
know,
at
I
it
know.
the
The
wrong way.
EDO development is,
I said it was Common Core math.
Yeah, but that's not what was ever intended to pay back the bond issue. What was intended to pay back the bond issue was an FAA grant.
My tax
For,
money, yeah.
yeah, your tax
That-
money
that's
is
all.
our
Every
fund.
time I fly, not,
That's
not
beyond
just
the
from.
scope of this committee. It's
yeah,
very-
Yeah.
at the parking lot.
So is that enough technical detail on?
No, I think you synopsized it.
All right.
Good.
If they hadn't used it for that, John, you'd still be paying it for some airport in Oregon or
That's why,
Hawaii or
that's why,
Alaska.
that's why I think we ought to impeach everybody in our government.
That is definitely beyond the scope of this.
John, you got enough, we got a full agenda for next,
Yes,
everybody's got their homework and.
I'm gonna go and, work on getting our next meeting set up at the airport with Blake presenting the 5-year plan and Calvin Thompson there. In between meetings, we're gonna work on our charter, which would be our goals and objectives. And, see what else have I got?
And we'll look at citizen input as it comes in.
And citizen input, yeah.
And, so we're gonna be at the airport, right? That way we can, go up to the,
I'll work this tomorrow to make sure we
if you can actually go up to the windows there and Blake or whatever, can kind of point out where things are. But
It may even be,
can.
not that it necessarily, I was about to say, it's not even necessarily that we're meeting, convene the meeting itself, but, even if you want to get there, say, an hour in advance, or 30 minutes in advance, and just walk around and kind of get a lay of the land.
Yeah.
It's very open, and it's,
Yeah.
nothing's prohibited to do it.
Well, if we're gonna meet there a half hour early, I guess we just need to make sure everybody can do it before the official meeting starts, is to have a little tour.
Yeah. And then the meeting itself would actually, would begin at 6 o'clock.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'll get back with everybody by Monday or Tuesday of next week, so. Have I missed anything for the next week's agenda?
Cecilia, you there?
I am here. I only have one more question. Looking at Vincent and airport economic development, everything, I think when they do come in and speak, and I understand that. I think that's a great idea, and I was just wondering if that could be a future agenda item. I will be glad to try to locate one. I will take on that responsibility if you think that it would be worthwhile.
To locate, to do what now?
An airport economic development specialist.
Oh. I think that'd be good.
And I'll be glad to take on the responsibility to try to find one. I know we've got a lot packed into the next meeting, but maybe for a future agenda item before we wrap up, I really would like to see what they have to say. And maybe that,
Actually, they've got the aeronautical or aerospace industry for the state of Georgia. They may be able to point her in the right direction.
Yep.
I know some consultants that do that also, to see if you want.
They probably do it for free. And I encourage everybody to read these documents. They got circulated around if you haven't already.
And I've also got I just remembered, I've got, hey, Cecilia, I also have a contact name for the Georgia Aerospace Development. And I'll send that contact name over to you as well. And therefore,
Anything else anybody wants to talk about?
I'm good.
How about anybody want to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Wait a minute. Thought we were gonna have a chance.
No, okay.
Go ahead.
If you could please explain to us what the terms of the citizen participation involvement is. I'm unclear. I don't know if I've missed something. You mentioned earlier about something being on the airport website.
Yeah, there's a
Just tell
form
me.
that we created, and it was put on the airport website, and I can email it to you as well.
Right, this is what was discussed in the last meeting, and it was a form that kind of gave an outline as to what we would like to see from the citizens. What are your concerns and what are your backup information for your concerns? And then based on that, we would make a decision if it was something that we would incorporate into our overall discussions, or if it was something that we would ask that particular individual to speak on as well, if we felt that it was something that we needed further information about, so.
Okay, what about beyond that, as far as participation at meetings?
Well, that's what we were talking about, was we get the written input, and then we go through it, and we maybe select 2 or 3 people to actually come up and provide additional background and input, in addition to just the written format, is to have some dialogue.
So there's no allowance for participation at the meeting itself based on something that might be said, or?
Well, that's what I talked about, was that at the next meeting, we might set aside 15 minutes or something to review some of the input that we've gotten so far, but we want the folks to articulate something, present it, and then, you know, we'd reach out to them and have them come and set aside some time to, you know, provide additional dialogue on what they provided and input, so.
So does that mean I'm not able to say what I'd like to say tonight?
Yeah, that's true.
That's true.
We've been here an hour and a half, so we're gonna,
Well, we got the citizen viewpoints, you can put that in there, and I'll distribute that through all of us, and I guess we're gonna put it up somewhere else. And then we've got the email one, and then we're gonna, from what I understand, we're gonna drill down on those and find the topics we wanna discuss.
That's correct.
I've got one more question.
okay, one more.
Again, thank you guys for all your time working on this committee. Mr. Reinhardt mentioned that he only got one email on the feedback channel. Is that email address on the airport website now?
It's on that form,
It's on the form.
yeah,
That's on the airport website.
it should be.
Blake told me, or he sent me an email saying it had been posted on the website out there.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
I haven't looked at it.
It's kind of hard to send an email when you don't have an address. so.
There's also a mailing address on there also.
Yep.
The form was posted yesterday, it's on the front
was it?
page of the website, yeah.
I was supposed to yesterday.
The airport website?
Mhm.
Okay. So thanks, so. And then you guys can download that and circulate it to whoever you want, or put it on your guys' website, so we'll go from there.
I'm just only talking about that website as well as the airport site.
I'm not sure it is or not. Did you say?
It is.
Oh, it is, okay,
Uh-huh.
okay.
Where at?
Where'd you say that was, Cecilia? On,
It's on that website.
under what? Documents
Yeah,
or?
under what?
Hold on just a second. Look,
See, that's the advantage of you being sitting there in a bar using your laptop.
Where are you anyway?
I'm over that from Houston, Texas. Maybe I might have misspelled. It's responsible to here today, and I'm not sure the form actually over yet. Let me make sure that I'm telling you right. I noticed I went to the airport side, I found the actual form on the airport.
But it's on the Airport Authority website, so,
It's on the, yes.
okay. All in favor of adjourn? All right. Thanks, everybody.
Give Johnny a minute. It's in my right hand. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Johnny wants to be in our
That's why you only carry. Yeah, that's what I kind of understood. And I wouldn't like to say.
Yeah, where's mine?
I changed my shirt. Appreciate it. I gotta go to another meeting.
Absolutely.